The indigenous people of the Marianas are referred to as Chamorros, yet before Spanish colonization, the term Chamorro had likely never been used in reference to the indigenous people of the Marianas. One of the earliest documented use of the word Chamorro as a reference to the indigenous inhabitants of the Marianas appears in a 1726 manuscript, a full 200 years after European contact. Prior to the 18th century, the Europeans referred to the people of the Marianas as Indios, natives, Chamorris, or even as savages. So where did the word Chamorro originate from? Guahu si Pulan, and in this video we will explore the origin of the word Chamorro. There are several theories as to the origin of the word Chamorro. One prominent theory argues that Chamorro came from the Spanish word chamorro, which means bold or shorn. This theory was first put forth by Frenchman Louis-Claude Freycinet in his 1827 to 1839 publication. According to this theory, Spanish-speaking sailors named the indigenous peoples of the Marianas Chamorro after their striking physical characteristic of having a shorn head with a top knot. And this does make sense. After all, early European accounts described some Chamorros with this hairstyle. However, there are major flaws with this theory. First is that while some early accounts do describe Chamorros with the shaved head and top knot hairstyle, other accounts describe Chamorros, both women and men, with very long hair. These contradicting sources probably indicate that pre-colonial Chamorros must have had a variety of hairstyles: short, long, shaven, and so on. So why would the Spanish-speaking sailors label them Chamorro after one hairstyle when they likely had a variety of hairstyles? The second problem with this theory is that the Spanish word chamorro has different meanings depending on the Spanish-speaking area. For instance, in the southeastern Spanish region of Murcia, chamorro means stout, fat, or obese. In Mexico, chamorro means calf of the leg, especially if it's fat. And the majority of the Spanish-speaking sailors that passed through the Marianas were from Mexico because the Manila galleon trade route went from the Mexican ports of Acapulco to Manila. Therefore, it would be highly unusual that these Spanish-speaking sailors would use the word chamorro in a way that they are not accustomed to. The third and last issue with this theory is that there are no known early records of any person calling the indigenous inhabitants chamorro because of their hairstyle, meaning that this theory is largely speculative. As mentioned, Freycinet was the first to put forth this theory in his 1827 to 1839 publication, more than 300 years after European contact. For all these reasons, the theory that Chamorro originated from the Spanish word chamorro seems unlikely. The most likely origin theory of the word Chamorro is that it is derived from the word Chamorri. According to 17th century missionary accounts, Chamorri was the indigenous name for the noble or chiefly class inhabitants of the Marianas. There may be alternative meanings and origin theories for the word Chamorri, but I will go over them later. We know that the term Chamorro appears as early as 1726, but what evidence is there connecting Chamorro to Chamorri? The evidence for the Chamorro derived from Chamorri theory is the textual transition from Chamorri to Chamorro in the written accounts. While the term Chamorro does not appear in any of the written accounts predating the 18th century, the term Chamorri first appears in Juan Pobre's 1602 accounts and many other times throughout 17th century accounts. For example, in early island description of the Marianas by the Jesuit missionaries mentioned that although the Chamorris were well respected by the common people, the Chamorris had no ultimate political authority over them. Early accounts mention that it was taboo for the Chamorris to marry commoners. Now, Take careful note of these particular accounts, for it leads to the strongest evidence for the Chamorro derived from Chamorri Theory, which is found in a manuscript authored by Juan Antonio Tornos in 1789. Quote, "The nobles, who were called Chamorros, never married a woman of lower status than their own, and if someone did so, it was reputed as an infamy. The Marianos did not recognize any king, lord, or government, and although the nobles were very respected by the common people, they had no authority nor control over them." The reason why Tornos's description of the Marianas seems very familiar is because his information is directly from the 17th century missionary accounts that I previously referred to. Just compare them with each other. If you haven't noticed already, there is one massive difference between Tornos and the early missionary writings. And this difference is that Tornos used the word Chamorro rather than Chamorri. Tornos knew that the original term was Chamorri because he's using those early accounts as his sources, and he could have used Chamorri, yet instead Tornos decided to use the alternative term Chamorro, which appeared as early as 1726. Despite Chamorro making its first appearance in the 18th century, it was rarely used until the 19th century. As for Chamorri, the term all but disappears after the 18th century, making one of its last appearance in an 1821 manuscript written by Prussian Adalbert von Chamisso. Interestingly, Chamisso used the term Chamorri to refer to the indigenous language of the Marianas. Here, the original understanding of Chamorri referring to only the noble class was changed and used to be the name of the language of the Marianas. And this is one of the last times that Chamorri is used because from here on now, Chamorro completely replaced Chamorri to refer to not only the indigenous language of the Marianas, but the people as well, irrespective of rank. One can only speculate as to why Chamorri changed to Chamorro. Perhaps the evolution of Chamorri to Chamorro and its subsequent expansion to include all indigenous people of the Marianas was because the Marianas noble class system ended with the Spanish conquest of the Marianas by the end of the 17th century, as coincidentally, the term Chamorri pretty much disappeared after the Spanish conquest. Or perhaps there were changes in the Spanish orthography, which led to Chamorri changing into Chamorro. While we may never know for certain why Chamorri was changed into Chamorro, there is hard evidence that Chamorro is indeed probably derived from Chamorri. However, there are many questions on the origin and meaning of the word Chamorri. While the 17th century missionaries wrote that Chamorri referred to the noble or chiefly class, there seems to be a similar word Chamorri with an entirely different meaning, which first appears in the logbook of Pilot Major Esteban Rodriguez in 1565 and also appearing in Juan Martinez's 1567 accounts. According to these manuscripts, Chamorri means friend. Rodriguez was also the first person to record a basic Chamorro dictionary. And according to this dictionary, the word for friend in the Chamorro language is Chamor, and the word for good is Maori. If both words are pronounced quickly, you get Chamamari, meaning good friend. Could Chamorri then be the combination of the words Chamor and Maori? Could there be a connection between Rodriguez's and Martinez's accounts of Chamorri, which means friend, with the 17th century accounts of Chamorri, meaning noble or chiefly class? Or is this a case of homonyms, which are words that have the same pronunciation but different meanings? The answer is unclear because the word Chamorri in the context of Fred does not appear beyond Rodriguez's and Martinez's accounts. Another possible Chamorri origin theory was put forth by Don Luis Torres in 1819. According to Torres, when Magellan first approached the Marianas in 1521, the Chamorros sailed out to the Europeans and shouted, "Tzatmu'ulin," meaning drop the rudder. However, the Europeans misunderstood Tzatmu'ulin to be the name of their nation. This phrase was apparently written down wrongly as Chamorrin and Chamorris, as found in Ligobian's 1700 publication. There are issues with this theory. Since Torres claims that Chamorri originated from the phrase Tzatmu'ulin, which was supposedly said by the Chamorros during their encounter with Magellan, then why is this Tzatmu'ulin phrase not recorded by Magellan's chronicler Antonio Pigafetta or any of Magellan's crew? It seems quite odd that the word Chamorris first appeared in Ligobian's 1700 publication, if the origins of Chamorris was supposedly based on the encounter with Magellan in 1521. Torres is also factually wrong when he claims that Tzatmu'ulin was written wrongly first as Chamorris by Ligobian in his 1700 publication, because as mentioned already, the word Chamorri appeared earlier in Juan Pobre's 1602 publication. We have to also take into account the earlier usage of Chamorri, which means friend, that appeared in Rodriguez's 1565 and Martinez's 1567 accounts. From these sources, it seems nearly impossible that Chamorri originated from a misunderstanding of the phrase Tzatmu'ulin, meaning drop the rudder, and was believed to be the name of the natives' nation, as Torres claims. Taking everything in consideration, Chamorri is probably its own indigenous word. The 16th century usage of Chamorri, meaning friend, may either be a homonym or may have evolved into the 17th century usage of Chamorri, meaning a chiefly or noble class. Regardless of the origin or original meaning of Chamorri, what's clear is that the textual transition in the historical accounts from Chamorri to Chamorro indicate that the word Chamorro probably evolved from the indigenous word Chamorri. Chamorri, a word once used in reference to only the noble inhabitants of the Marianas during the 17th century, was altered to Chamorro and used to refer to all indigenous inhabitants of the Marianas by the early 18th century. While Chamorro was rarely used at first, it gained widespread use in the 19th century, culminating with Chamorro being the official self-identifier today for Itatatonu, the people of the land. If you liked and enjoyed the video, consider supporting me on Patreon so I can continue to produce more Pacific Studies content. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on all notifications, follow me on social media, and a special Seduce Mossy to Patreon supporters Puti'on and Pim Limtiaco. Seduce Mossy for watching, Guahusi Pulan, and Pulan has spoken.